January 9th, 2026. The President of the United States sits in the Situation Room staring at a map. His advisors are gathered around him. The topic is not Iran or Taiwan or the southern border. It's an island covered in ice that most Americans couldn't find on a map. And the conversation isn't about democracy or freedom or human rights. It's about the balance sheet. It's about control. It's about making sure the other guy doesn't own the vault before you do. We've been told this story as about strategy, about military bases and polar shipping routes and climate change opening new frontiers. And sure, all of that is true. But strip away the rhetoric, and you'll find the same story that's driven empires for 3,000 years. It's about resources. It's about the ledger. It's about who gets to collect the rent when the ice melts and the treasure chest opens. This isn't a joke. This is the oldest game in the world, dressed up in modern language. And if you think buying Greenland sounds absurd, wait until you see the numbers. Wait until you understand what's buried under that ice. Wait until you realize that 3 superpowers are circling the same prize, and only one of them can win. Let's rewind. Let's go back to when America was still a scrappy upstart buying land, like it was on clearance at a going-out-of-business sale. 1867. Secretary of State William Seward just pulled off the deal of the century. He bought Alaska from the Russians for $7.2 million. That's about $129 million in today's money. Critics called it Seward's folly. They said he bought a frozen wasteland. They laughed at him in Congress. Then they found gold. Then they found oil. Then Alaska became the strategic cornerstone of American power in the Pacific. Suddenly, Seward looked like a genius. But here's what most people don't know. Seward didn't stop at Alaska. He commissioned internal studies exploring the acquisition of Greenland and Iceland. He wanted to control the North Atlantic the way he just locked down the North Pacific. He understood something brutal and true. Geography is destiny, and if you control the choke points, you control the future. The idea died in committee. Domestic politics and Reconstruction killed the momentum, but the seed was planted. The logic was sound, and 50 years later it came roaring back. 1946, the world is shattered. Europe is in ruins. The Soviet Union is rising fast. And President Harry Truman is looking at bomber routes over the Arctic. He knows the next war won't be fought in trenches. It'll be fought in the sky. And if Soviet bombers come for American cities, they're coming over the North Pole. Greenland is the interception point. Without it, America is blind. So Truman makes a formal offer to Denmark. $100 million in gold. Not paper, not bonds. Actual gold bullion stacked in a vault. The Joint Chiefs of Staff describe Greenland as indispensable to the safety of the United States. This isn't diplomatic language. This is a threat dressed up as a compliment. Denmark declines, politely, firmly. They say Greenland is not for sale. But America doesn't walk away. They change tactics. If they can't buy the house, they'll rent the guest room forever. 1951. A defense agreement grants the United States permanent military access to Greenland. It's still in effect today. Thule Air Base becomes one of the most strategically important installations on Earth. It's the northernmost U.S. military facility in the world. It hosts early warning radar scanning for ballistic missiles over the polar routes. It's the tripwire. It's the alarm system. And it sits on Danish territory. So when Donald Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland in 2019, the defense establishment didn't laugh. They nodded, because they'd been thinking about it for 150 years. Now let's talk about the map. If you look at a flat classroom globe, Greenland looks like a distorted blob drifting at the edge of the world. But if you look at a polar projection, you see something very different. You see the cork in the bottle. You see the gatekeeper of the North Atlantic. You see the GIUK gap. That stands for Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. It's one of the most important naval choke points on Earth. Imagine you're a Russian submarine captain. Your mission is to get a nuclear-armed submarine from Arctic bases near Murmansk into the open Atlantic. You have to pass through the GIUK gap. There's no other practical route. And NATO has been watching that corridor for 70 years. Underwater sensors, patrol aircraft, satellites, acoustic surveillance networks that can hear a pin drop 2,000 feet below the surface. If you control Greenland, you control the western wall of that gate. If Greenland falls under hostile influence, that gate becomes harder to secure. Think about the scale of that. One island, 57,000 people, and it determines whether NATO can track Russian submarines threatening the entire eastern seaboard. This is where the phrase unsinkable aircraft carrier comes from. You can sink ships, you can disable fleets, but you cannot sink an island. Control of Greenland gives permanent forward basing for radar, aircraft, sensors, and missile defense. Distance equals reaction time, and reaction time saves lives. A missile launched from Moscow to Washington travels about 5,000 miles. From northern Greenland to Moscow, it's barely over 2,000. Geography compresses warning time, and warning time is survival. Now add a new player to the board. China. Beijing has been studying the Arctic for 2 decades. They call themselves a near-Arctic state, which is geographically absurd but strategically brilliant. They've invested billions in polar research. They've built the world's largest icebreaker fleet. They've funded infrastructure projects in Iceland and Norway and Finland. And they've been quietly circling Greenland like a shark. Why? Because the ice is melting. And when the ice melts, new shipping routes open. For centuries, the Arctic Ocean was a frozen wall. If you wanted to ship a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam, you took the long route through the Suez Canal, 30 to 40 days. But as Arctic ice retreats, new routes are emerging. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coastline can cut that time by 10 to 15 days. Fuel savings alone translate into billions annually. China calls this vision the Polar Silk Road, and Greenland sits adjacent to the gateway of these routes. Whoever builds the ports, the refueling hubs, the repair yards, and the logistics infrastructure becomes the toll booth of the future Arctic economy. And China specializes in writing very large infrastructure checks. But shipping lanes are just the appetizer. The main course is what's buried under the ice. And this is where the story stops being about strategy and starts being about raw greed. Greenland isn't just ice. It's a geological vault. As the glaciers retreat, surveys have confirmed enormous deposits of rare earth elements. The most important site is called Konnefield in southern Greenland. It's considered one of the largest undeveloped rare earth deposits outside China. And rare earths are the secret ingredient of modern civilization. Your smartphone, your electric car, your fighter jet, your cruise missile. None of it works without rare earths. These elements have names you can't pronounce: neodymium, dysprosium, praseodymium, terbium. They're used in high-performance magnets, guidance systems, electric motors, radar, satellites. A single F-35 fighter jet requires hundreds of pounds of rare Earth-based components. Without them, modern weapons systems don't exist. Here's the nightmare. China controls 80 to 90% of the world's rare earth processing capacity. Even when rare earths are mined elsewhere, they're usually shipped to China for refining. If Beijing ever restricted exports, Western manufacturing would collapse, defense production would freeze, supply chains would fracture. It would be an economic Pearl Harbor without a single shot fired. Greenland represents one of the few realistic paths to breaking that monopoly. Company estimates suggest a Cunnifield deposit alone contains over 1 million metric tons of rare earth oxides. That's enough to supply global demand for decades. It's a strategic lifeline. It's a hedge against Chinese leverage. And it's sitting under Danish sovereignty. But here's the uncomfortable part. While American politicians were making jokes about buying Greenland, a Chinese mining company quietly acquired a major ownership stake in the firm holding development rights to Cunnifield. That gives Beijing meaningful influence over one of the most strategically important mineral projects on the planet. So buying Greenland isn't just about expansion. It's about preventing the factory of the world from controlling the raw materials of the next industrial era. Washington isn't seeing ice. It's seeing a supply chain vulnerability written in Mandarin. Now, let me tell you a ghost story. 1959. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers arrives in Greenland with smiles and shovels. They'd tell Denmark they're building a scientific research station under the ice, a harmless Arctic lab to study weather and glaciers. What they actually built was a small underground city carved into the glacier. It had living quarters, a hospital, a chapel, a movie theater, roughly 200 personnel at peak capacity. It was powered by one of the first portable military nuclear reactors ever deployed. The public story was science. The real mission was Project Iceworm. The plan was extraordinary. The U.S. military envisioned carving thousands of miles of tunnels beneath the ice sheet to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles. The missiles would be constantly relocated on underground rail systems. Soviet surveillance couldn't track them. Soviet missiles couldn't destroy them. It was the ultimate deterrent. A nuclear arsenal that moved like a ghost. There was just one problem: ice moves. Engineers underestimated how aggressively the glacier would deform the tunnels. Walls warped, ceilings shifted. Maintenance became overwhelming. The reactor infrastructure began to buckle under the pressure of the moving ice. By the mid-1960s, the Pentagon quietly admitted the concept was unworkable. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967. The reactor core was removed, but much of the site's waste was left behind. Tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, PCB contaminated materials, sewage, low-level radioactive residue, all buried beneath layers of ice. At the time, planners assumed the ice would remain frozen indefinitely. That assumption is now in doubt. As Arctic temperatures rise, scientists warn that parts of Camp Century could eventually thaw. Contaminated meltwater could seep into surrounding ecosystems over the long term. It's a buried sin, a frozen secret. And it's a reminder that the United States has been playing games in Greenland for decades, while telling everyone it's just about science. Today, America's presence in Greenland is far less secret. The installation formerly known as Thule Air Base is now Pitchafik Space Base. It's the northernmost U.S. military installation on Earth. It hosts a powerful early warning radar operated by the 12th Space Warning Squadron. It scans continuously for ballistic missile launches over the polar routes. It's a critical pillar of America's missile warning architecture. If access to this base were ever compromised, early warning coverage over the Arctic would be significantly weakened. Which is why, from Washington's perspective, owning Greenland wouldn't just simplify diplomacy. It would permanently lock down one of the most strategically sensitive radar locations on the planet. But let's get real for a second. You can't just buy a country, not in 2026, not without consequences. Greenland isn't empty land. It's home to 57,000 people. Most of them are Inuit. They have their own language, their own parliament, their own flag, their own dreams of independence, and those dreams are real. Polls consistently show that a strong majority of Greenlanders support independence in principle, often between 60 and 80%. But here's the trap. Every year, Denmark sends Greenland a block grant of roughly $600 million. That single transfer covers more than half of Greenland's public budget. It's roughly a fifth of the entire GDP. That money pays for hospitals, schools, infrastructure, energy systems, social services. Without it, the economy would contract sharply. Independence without replacement funding would mean immediate austerity, falling living standards, collapse. So here's the brutal truth. Greenland cannot currently afford to be fully independent unless someone replaces Denmark's money. And this is where the strategy shifts from buying land to buying influence. If Greenland eventually votes for independence, the Danish subsidy phases out. The new government urgently needs replacement funding. And suddenly, whoever steps in first with financing and security guarantees becomes the most important partner in the country. If the U.S. were to say, "Congratulations on your independence, we'll help replace that funding. We'll invest in infrastructure. We'll guarantee security in exchange for expanded military access and preferential investment rights," Washington would effectively gain enormous strategic leverage for a relatively modest annual cost. It's not conquest. It's a friendly takeover. It's soft power backed by hard cash. We're already seeing the groundwork. In 2020, the United States reopened a consulate in Nuuk for the first time since the 1950s. Alongside it came a $12.1 million civilian aid package aimed at business development and infrastructure. Denmark publicly welcomed the move. But privately, officials were clearly uneasy about Washington establishing a permanent foothold inside what had long been Copenhagen's backyard. It's the geopolitical equivalent of someone quietly saying, "You don't need your old partner anymore. We can take care of you," and the risk cuts both ways. If the U.S. hesitates, China is ready with its own checkbook, often offering fast financing with far fewer political conditions attached. So the real race isn't just to buy land. It's a race to become the preferred partner of a future independent Greenland. Now let's talk numbers. Let's indulge the fantasy for a moment. Let's say the diplomatic stars align. Denmark agrees to sell. Greenland agrees to be bought. Congress decides to cut the check. What's the price tag? How do you value 836,000 square miles of ice, rock, and strategic dominance? When Truman offered $100 million in 1946, that's roughly $1.6 billion in today's money. That's insultingly low. That's less than what Facebook paid for Instagram. When the story broke in 2019, analysts actually tried to run the numbers. Financial Times writers modeled different valuation scenarios. They factored in mineral potential, strategic military value, land comparisons. Some estimates pushed toward the trillion-dollar range. But there's another way to think about it. The Alaska model. We bought Alaska for about $129 million in today's dollars, roughly 2 cents per acre. If you applied that logic to Greenland, the price would be comically low. But real estate is about comps, and the geopolitical market has heated up since 1867. A more realistic lens is to treat Greenland like a distressed sovereign asset with massive upside. Using that logic, you could justify valuations anywhere from $200 billion to $500 billion, even before counting minerals. To put that in perspective, $500 billion is in the same ballpark as what the U.S. spends annually just servicing its national debt. It's comparable to the cost of developing the F-35 program. It's less than the market cap of Tesla. For the price of one Elon Musk company, the United States could theoretically secure the Arctic for generations. But here's the catch that breaks the calculator. You're not just buying land, you're buying a society. When the U.S. bought the Virgin Islands in 1917, we bought the land and the people. If Greenland became a U.S. territory, its roughly 57,000 residents would likely gain territorial status and eventual citizenship rights. They'd be entitled to federal services, healthcare support, infrastructure upgrades, social programs. The infrastructure bill alone would be staggering. Greenland has no inter-city roads. You can't drive from one town to another. Everything moves by air or boat. Bringing that system up to modern standards would take trillions of dollars over decades. Any purchase price would just be a down payment. The renovation costs would dwarf it. Supporters argue the alternative is worse. What's the cost of losing Arctic dominance? Of China controlling North Atlantic access? Of falling behind in the materials race that will define the 21st century? In that context, $1 trillion starts to sound rational. But there's one thing every spreadsheet ignores: the people. While Washington and Beijing play chess on maps, the people living on the board are already in crisis. To understand Greenland's vulnerability, you have to look at its wounds. Wound 1 is the Little Danes experiment. In 1951, Denmark removed 22 Inuit children from their families and sent them to Denmark to be culturally reshaped. Many returned unable to speak their own language, disconnected from their communities. Lives were fractured. In 2022, Denmark apologized, but apologies don't erase generational trauma. Wound 2 is the silent epidemic. Greenland has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, especially among young men. Long darkness, isolation, rapid cultural change, and limited mental health support have created a quiet tragedy that touches nearly every family. Money can build roads. It can't easily heal wounds. When politicians talk about buying Greenland, they're not talking about empty land. They're talking about a real population, resilient, wounded, and deeply sensitive to being treated like a commodity. One of the clearest wounds is the vanishing sled dogs. For thousands of years, Inuit hunters and their dogs were inseparable. Survival in the Arctic depended on that bond. Today, climate change is breaking it. Sea ice forms later and melts earlier, collapsing traditional hunting seasons. Without reliable hunts, feeding sled dogs becomes impossible. Imported dog food is prohibitively expensive, forcing many hunters into heartbreaking choices. Over the last 2 decades, Greenland's sled dog population has fallen by nearly half, a visceral symbol of a culture caught between a fading past and an uncertain future. And now the stakes have escalated. January 2026 marked a shift from awkward rhetoric to serious geopolitics. U.S. officials confirmed Greenland is now framed as a national security priority, citing Arctic competition with Russia and China. Denmark has firmly rejected any transfer of sovereignty, warning that even suggesting force threatens the foundations of the post-war international order. No invasion is happening, but the tone has changed. Greenland has become central to a new global equation, one defined by melting ice, strategic access, critical minerals, and power. The question isn't whether Greenland's value will rise. It's whether that value will be handled with diplomacy, money, or force.